Hi there everyone, hope you're well, I hope you're having a good week. Welcome to the Sports Stories podcast. This is episode 39 and this is the second to last episode of the series. So I hope you enjoy it. Furthermore, I hope you've enjoyed the backlog of episodes, and if you have missed out on some of the previous shows, please go to the website, which is www.sportstories247.com, and you can catch up on what you might have missed. Now, last week's episode was with Kev Nicholson. Now, the feedback and the comments we've received have been absolutely fantastic. I really appreciate them because they really do make a difference to both myself in terms of what we're delivering, but also to hear how the guests and their stories are being received. Now, the feedback from Kev in terms of his journey through a career in football, some of the sacrifices, the highs and the lows, but also the real key point about him really trying to be present and be himself in the moment struck true. So thanks again for all that feedback. I'd really like to also offer out a really huge thanks to Ian Braid, one of our previous guests on the Sports Stories podcast, but also one of our keen listeners who have really offered us some feedback in terms of the quality of the guests, in terms of their genuineness and their stories, and trusting the process in terms of really bringing out their value and asking the key questions at the right time. So thanks, Ian, we really appreciate that. Now, today's guest is one I'm really looking forward to. I have with me Lou Englefield. Lou is the founding director of Pride Sports, which is a UK LGBTIQ+ sport development and inclusion organisation. Now, what you will find with Lou is she's really engaging, very interesting and incredibly thought-provoking. And what you will get today is some real great questions, and some of the topic areas we cover will really make you think. So for me, this is an episode really not to miss, to sit back and really engage in. I'm so pleased and excited to have Lou with me because she will share her story in a very honest and humble way with her energy and passion. But what she will also do, I'm sure, is touch on some of the areas which are often unspoken or difficult to go to. Areas to do with inclusion, lack of opportunities, use of terminology, things to do with volunteering in a sport-based voluntary organisation where times are often really tough, and also sexuality. Lou will share many stories, and I'm pretty sure you'll have a great time listening in. So what I would encourage you to do is listen in to not just what she says, but also how she says it. She's a senior leader in an organisation which I believe has been groundbreaking. So without further ado, I'd just like to introduce and wish a very warm welcome to Lou Englefield, the founding director of Pride Sport, which is a fantastic organisation working in the area and the community of LGBTIQ+ and many other areas in football. So I'd just like to wish a very warm welcome to Lou. Lou, welcome to the Sports Stories podcast, and thanks so much for giving up your time. I appreciate this is a really busy time of the year, and I'm sure we'll come on to some of your busyness, as it were, later on in the podcast. But,
I hope not.
Oh, well, thanks for giving up your time anyway, because, I'm really excited to talk to you and find out a little bit more about you, to be fair. I'm going to start where we start with most of my guests is, can you give us a bit of an introduction to maybe yourself, but also, your formative years? How did you get involved with sport, and, what was the family background like around that?
So my name's Lou Englefield, and I'm a director of an LGBTIQ+ sports development and inclusion organisation called Pride Sports. And in that role, I'm also the campaign director of Football versus Homophobia. In my spare time,
Wow.
in my spare time, I'm also a board member of the FAIR Network, which is football's global anti-discrimination network, and I'm also a chair of Pride House International, which is a small charity that works to support the delivery of Pride houses at global sports events.
So Lou, do you have any spare time?
No, not a lot, because I also live on a 5-acre small holding, and that takes up all my spare time. So,
oh, gosh, so you're clearly really busy, and
yeah.
you've got a huge involvement in sport. But let's go back to sort of early days, and then we'll come to all of that. But how did you get into working in sport, or what was your experience of sport as a young child?
Well, I think my experience of sport as a young child was was quite varied, to be honest. So I was kind of, there was nothing that I was particularly outstanding at, but I was a good hockey player for school. I captained our hockey team. And also I threw shot as well. I put shot for our school. I think, you know, because I was the really big kid. So they were like, oh, what should we do with her? Oh, yeah, she can be a thrower. But I didn't really have the coordination to do javelin. I was absolutely rubbish at that. And I know now as an adult that I don't have like a lot of explosive power. I'm a kind of, you know, I'm all about going the distance, not getting there very quickly. So actually, you know, you put a shot in my hand, woo, and I could just about do that, especially, you know, if I was thinking about someone I was a bit cross with at the time, you know. But I was really lucky because my dad was really sporty. Right. He was a teacher. He was really into drama and really into sport at the same time, which was, you know, I suppose is quite unusual in some ways, you know, sports and arts crossover. Yeah. But he used to do things like, for example, so I put shot for school, and before we had a big competition, I would bring the shot put home with me in my school bag, and then my dad would like mark out a throwing circle in the back garden, and I would just like, you know, practice in the back garden. But also I grew up on the south coast, on the edge of the New Forest, and near the Solent, which is, you know, one of Europe's busiest kind of like sailing areas, and we grew up sailing. So, oh, wow. You know, on a Saturday, you know, every Saturday I used to go to Hythe Sailing Club in Southampton Water, and get in my mirror dinghy to start with, and race against these guys who were like, you know, in their flying 15s, you know, these monstrous like racing dinghies, and I'd potter along in my, you know, in my mirror, and even with a handicap I'd lose terribly, you know. But yeah, that was, you know, every weekend we sailed. Every weekend during the season we raced as well, you know. But yeah, not you know, and sometimes I crewed for people in faster boats. But generally, you know, at a sailing club, in those days anyway, everyone raced against everybody, and you would have a handicap if you were in a slower boat, and the idea was that kind of bumped up your potential to do okay, but it never seemed to work.
Were you competitive then as a young person? You know, you sounds like you had an opportunity to have a go at different sports there, but you know, how did you sort of turn up to sport?
Well, you know, it's really funny because I think one of the things about my dad was that, you know, again, in retrospect, I look back on it, and he was one of those absolute nightmares that you would never want to be a sports dad, you know. So he would do things like race you and beat you when you stood no chance of winning against him. And literally, this is kind of quite embarrassing. So this is the culture that I grew up in. I can remember still now at my age when I was like, I think about 21, and I went on holiday with my dad to France. Yeah. I went on holiday with my parents, and we were traveling through France, and we went to a swimming pool, and I just finished writing my dissertation for uni. And whilst I was writing my dissertation, I swam every day. So because I was writing for long hours, because obviously I left it all to the last minute, I was every day at lunchtime, I was going to the pool and, you know, just knocking out lengths in the pool. And anyway, so then that summer we went on holiday, and my dad was like, you know, we get in this municipal pool in France. And of course, my dad's like, right, first one to the other end, because that's what he was like. And it was my favorite stroke, so it was breaststroke. So he's like, first one to the other end, breaststroke, and I whooped him Oh, it was like the best moment. It was absolutely brilliant.
How did he take it? How did he take it?
Well, he took it on the chin, to be fair. And he was like, blimey, you know, you must have been, you know. And I said, well, yeah, I was like, well, I've been swimming every day, haven't I? Do you know what I mean? And of course he hadn't. So, but anyway, yeah. So to be honest, I think I'm not traditionally, you know, you would not think, oh, Lou Englefield, you know, she's such a super competitive athlete. But I think we were brought up to be competitive. And now if you ask anyone around me, they go, Lou, she's so competitive, you know, but in my own little universe, do you know what I mean? And mainly against myself, you know, okay.
So where did your competitiveness in sport take you? You know, how, and what was your kind of journey? Did you just carry on doing recreational sports, trying different things out, or did you focus? You know, where did you go?
No, I think, well, a few things happened. I think one of the things that happened to me was that I came out. So I think I found, you know, during high school, you know, sport was okay. I then went to sixth form, you know, but it's all about opportunities as well, isn't it? Because I think I then went to sixth form, there wasn't really a hockey team. I think I would have carried on playing hockey, but there wasn't really a hockey team at sixth form. So we played a bit of basketball, you know, and I was quite good at that. So that was quite cool. So I played that for a bit, but it's like that thing, you know, there was no real pathway for me, I suppose. To be honest, I went and tried out at county hockey trials when I was a kid, and I didn't get in. I was like second choice, which was a bit devastating. But you know, critically, I can see why I wasn't chosen, actually, because I hadn't been coached properly as a goalkeeper. So when I looked, I can really distinctly remember watching the girl who was chosen, and she was outstanding and had obviously been coached properly, you know, was sliding into, you know, shots, and, you know, was really great. Whereas I came from a school where they were kind of like, you know, our PE teacher was like, oh, you know, get on the pitch, stick a load of pads on, and then dive around and try and get it. And I was a bit more, yeah, totally. I was a bit more like a football goalkeeper than a hockey goalkeeper. I was all about my hands rather than about my legs, really.
Right, so a bit raw kind of stuff.
yeah, totally. And I think, you know, when I look back on that, I just think, you know, and maybe it's a kind of time difference thing, but knowing the things I now know about sport, having been coached properly by people, and you know, I just look back on my childhood and just think, you know, wow, it's a lottery, you know, it's all a complete lottery, sport and excellence. Because actually, if people got, you know, if children got access to proper coaching and stuff, you know, they could fulfill their potential loads more. And also, you know, if you followed like an educational pathway in which, you know, the sport was consistent, that would help as well. And a whole load of other things, you know, like really important stuff like, you know, socioeconomic disadvantage, you know, issues around racism, you know, the bigger picture.
Well, the two words that strike me from what you've said is kind of nearly is opportunities and avenues, actually, and how either they help you or they hinder you having the opportunities or the avenues open to you. Because, you know, by not having opportunities, it sounds like you've had to find ways through in some way. You know,
well, do you know what? If I'm really honest about it, I think I'm a bit of a meanderer anyway.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Because if you look at my career, you know, I know we've talked before, and if you look at my career is not straightforward. I did not leave uni. I did not go to uni. I did not do sport. I did sociology. Right. I then worked in a whole range of third sector organisations. And kind of really coincidentally, I've ended up working in sport. But of course, now with hindsight, I can think, well, yeah, I was really sporty as a kid. You know, we're a really active family. My mum's 80 and has powered her way through lockdown by walking, every single day. She walks like five miles a day during lockdown around the Hampshire countryside, So I can see the links, I can see the kind of thread, but it's a thread that has meandered through my life, not like a direct,
They often say, though, don't they, something about you can only join the dots up looking back, and you've kind of now joined them up, haven't you? Whereas going forward, you didn't join them up, did you?
No, not at all, not at all.
Oh, gosh.
But I think the last 15 years working in sport and loosely human rights have been my happiest work time, definitely. So it's interesting how I've kind of brought those two things together, like a sense of social justice, which I've had for a very, I was brought up with that by my parents, and then a love of sport and physical activity as well. So
Lou, tell us a little bit about the human rights stuff and how you were brought up, and why is that important to you, or how did that kind of that energy come?
I think there's a couple of things. I think both my parents were of their time really concerned with social justice, but still kind of, it was, the 70s and 80s, and actually if you scratch the surface, they were absolutely awful when I came out. My mum stopped talking to me for a couple of years, but they were, my dad was kind of like a shop steward in a union, and my mum was, the daughter of a miner. So, my family were mine workers, in the South Wales collieries, and saw a lot of, I suppose, and saw some social injustice kind of play out amongst those communities, really. I mean, you can still see it, they're some of the poorest areas of the UK, really. So my parents were always kind of concerned about those things. My mum's a Christian,
right?
And whilst that has been quite problematic in our relationship, because then I came out as queer, and she didn't really like that, to put it mildly. Actually, the way in which my mother is a Christian is all about justice and grace, and treating people with with absolute grace, I suppose.
Can I ask, how old were you when you came out? Just so that kind of puts a picture.
Well, I was quite old when I came out, because I was 20. Either 20 or 21. I think I came out in 1988, so however old I was then.
Let's not bother there. Well, let's just keep moving on.
Yes, edit that bit out. So anyway, I was quite late coming out, because I just think I wasn't really exposed to the idea that you could be queer. I didn't know anything about it. And well, I suppose all depictions of it were completely negative, or there to be laughed at. So, what was the Mr. Humphreys in Are You Being Served?
Yeah, gosh.
Maybe that's too old for you. But
no, it doesn't. No, I get that one.
So just these kind of, and I think in an unspoken way, maybe, LGBT plus people were not to be trusted, that there were, and that was in my sort of like teenage years, and I kind of didn't, so I kind of came out. I didn't come out. So what happened was, I was a teenager like everyone else, started experimenting, went out with a couple of lads, thought, oh, this is really disgusting. What am I going to do about this? Because for me, what was a really important thing, even as a kind of adolescent, was to be able to have a family, and to be able to have children. And I was like, oh, this is a nightmare. How am I going to have a family and have children when actually there's just no way I'm going to, you know, have a relationship with a guy. It's just, it's just terrible. So it took me kind of, I started having those thoughts, I think, when I was about 14.
Okay.
Well, it took me another sort of 6 or 7 years to leave my parents' home, to see a little bit more of the world, and to think, oh, hang on a minute, there are some possibilities here. And you know, and to think, you know, but perhaps there is another life that I can live. So, but it took a long time, because it was, you know, and I'm not uncommon. I now know from working in the sector that, you know, until about 2010, I think 21 was the average age of coming out.
Okay.
Yeah,
and clearly it takes some time for people to sort of unravel that and their whole system that they're in, you know, feeling comfortable by the sounds of it.
Yeah, I think it does. And I think that, it's changed. You know, it's changed. So now the average age of coming out is about 15 or 16.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And I think that's because, you know, children, you know, young people now, you know, they get to the age where they start having sort of, you know, sexual or romantic feelings towards people. And because there's not the same level of shame attached to it and the same level of silence around it, it's a bit, you know, that whole thing is a bit more fast tracked. So, you know, I mean, I know people of my generation, like, you know, a friend of mine who knew, you know, and I think in retrospect, but, you know, had always known that he liked men and that he didn't really like women. And that wasn't a sexual thing to start with. It was just you know, like a being drawn to people, you know, and then never ever thought about having girlfriend, you know, just as soon as he was a teenager, even in those days, he just knew that he was gay. He just knew that that's where his attraction lay. You know, whereas I was a bit like, oh, you know, I didn't like men, but I didn't even think about liking women. I was just like, you know.
And Lou, those sort of late teenage experiences, you know, early 20s, how did that impact on, you know, your direction then? Because I know you've done some amazing and different jobs, but then you've obviously worked your way back in towards working in sports. How did that all pan out around then?
In a very circuitous way, I did sociology at uni, and which I think, you know, in retrospect was a really good fit with who I was, but I wasn't aware of that at the time. And then I kind of came out, so because I did sociology, and I was like the women's officer for the National Union of Students at my uni.
Brilliant.
And I hung out with I got feminism, you know, I suddenly got feminism when I was about 20. And so I hung out with a load of other feminists and queer people and, you know, musicians, and, you know, like we were all, you know, I went to uni in a small town. I was a little bit older because I'd kind of failed my A-levels a couple of times because I was so embroiled with my struggle around my
world,
identity.
Working it out.
Totally. That we were a real kind of mixture of people who, you know, we were these misfits from the local town who kind of like hung out together. Some of us were students, some of us were fashion designers, some of us were potters, you know, and we were feminists, we were queer, we were, you know, lefties, we were, you know, people with no politics at all. We were just like, you know, this bunch of different people. And I suppose I kind of, you know, hanging out with those people, and then kind of like moving on from uni, I thought, what can I do? And I moved to Nottingham and ended up getting a job. I volunteered all summer at Nottingham Women's Centre. Nottingham had this really big women's centre. It got like a dance space in it, you know, this massive kind of like sports hall space, and, you know, workshops on the ground floor, and a creche, and all these, a play scheme, all these things. So I volunteered there all summer. and did things like drove the play skiing bus, got my green card and drove the bus off to Scunthorpe or somewhere, you know, I don't know, wherever. And then a job came up as the admin worker there. So, you know, I'd got no work experience. Well, I've got loads, I'd always worked as a kid, you know, but I'd got no proper work experience. So I applied for that and I got that job. And I did that for about 9 months. And then a job came up as a resettlement worker at a local housing group. Yeah. And so I applied for that because it was a bit more interesting than being an admin worker, basically. Right. And because some of the people that I was around at that time worked in housing and homelessness. Right. So they were kind of like, oh yeah, why didn't you go for that, Lou? You'd be great at that.
So I'm hearing meandering again, really, just going from wherever came to place, rather than actually driving a direction. You went where the energy took you, kind of stuff.
Yeah, totally. I think this is the common theme is I wanted to do things that made a difference.
Okay.
So whatever I've done, you know, it has been about trying to make a difference, I suppose. Yeah. And I suppose that would be that's a kind of common thread. Right. So when this housing thing came up, I was like, great. It's a job where I can help resettle homeless people into their own homes. How exciting is that? And you know, so I'll do that for a bit. So I started doing that and I did that for about maybe a year, I don't know. And then another job came up, and the other job that came up was a development worker for a really exciting housing project in Nottingham that was called Emergency Accommodation for Women. And it was basically a kind of hostel that young women could access that was safer than just the kind of usual hostels, mixed environments. So it was a place that young women could go to kind of escape domestic violence, or, you know, if their young women were street homeless, that they could go. It wasn't a refuge, but it was somewhere that they could go and stay for like a period of 6 to 8 weeks, during which time they then might get rehoused by the council. Right. And so basically, I applied for that job because by this time I was working in homelessness, and it also sounded really exciting. It was kind of like, you've got to raise loads of money and you've got to write a load of policies, and you've also got to liaise with architects and think about, you know, accessible design, you know, all these other things. And I thought, God, that sounds amazing. So I applied for that, and I ended up getting it. I don't think I was the first choice, actually. There was something dodgy going on. I think somebody else got it and then turned it down, and so I was second, so I got it. Anyway,
but you made the most of it.
Absolutely. It started me off on my career. So I did, again, that was only a short-term contract. It was for like 2.5 years. Yeah. So I did that for 2.5 years.
What I'm really conscious of here is, you know, you mentioned about the group of people that you were hanging around with and being with, and you know, you mentioned them in the world of sort of politics or not politics, around religion, around arts and crafts, and all of those sort of things. But I never heard you talk around mixing with people in sport. And was that type of person in that group not in sport, or was it not acceptable at that stage, or how did you find that, being internally a sporty person?
Well, so this is my thing, I think. When I went to uni, I still hadn't come out. Yeah. I joined the hockey team. Because I joined the hockey team because in my first year, because hockey, you know, it was my sport. Yeah. And I went along to a couple of games, you know, it was part of Bucks, if Bucks existed, you know, that whole kind of intra-uni thing. I went to a couple of games, and my abiding memory of that was that I found it really difficult, because at that time, and I found there was some stuff about this during my hockey playing career as a teenager as well. Yeah. But in kind of because, you know, I played for a club outside of school,
Yeah.
Was that at the uni hockey club, there was a bit of a don't ask, don't tell kind of culture in women's sport at the time, which I think is only starting to disappear now, to be honest. And I think that there were, you know, quite a few lesbians, or, you know, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 lesbians on the uni hockey team, but no one spoke about it. Okay. And I went along, and it was me on my own, you know, for the first time, and I didn't know anybody. And if I didn't have the analysis that I have now, I would have just said, oh, it was really cliquey. But looking back on it in recent years, I've realised that the reason it was really cliquey was because all the lesbians were being lesbians but not talking about it.
Okay.
Because it was so, you know, oh, you know, you don't want to give women's sport a bad name.
Yeah, and we don't talk about this stuff.
Totally. So basically, I went to uni, and 2 things happened. You know, I played hockey, and there were a load of lesbians who didn't talk about being lesbians, were really closeted, and the whole situation I found really unpleasant and terrifying.
Right, yeah.
And then I met a load of feminists.
Right.
And some of them were queer, and they all talked about it.
Right.
You know, and there's
a lot of tension there kind of going on then, isn't there? You're getting pulled in different directions.
Yeah, completely. So at that point in my life, being a lesbian to me, being queer to me, was more important. It was a bit like, you know, like, I'm not going to get all grandiose about this, but, you know, I read the biographies of people like Robbie Rogers, you know, the footballer who felt that he had to leave football just to be able to be gay. You know, he was a professional player. It wasn't like that for me at all. But there did come a point when I was at uni, at the beginning of or middle of my second year, when I just thought, you know, where I came out, and the type of lesbian I wanted to be was not a hockey lesbian. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. I didn't want to be like running around making silly little in-jokes and making everyone feel excluded because and those women did that because they couldn't be themselves.
Yeah, they had to do that really because of the constraints they were put in some ways.
Yeah, totally. And the constraints that they put on themselves, I think, eventually. Yeah. So for me, it felt like at that point, there was just such a divide between sporty lesbians. I don't want to be a sporty lesbian because I don't want to be in the closet, or feminist lesbians. I want to be them because they talk about it, you know. So
and promote it and talk about it and educate and, you know, engage with.
Well, and just be, you know, we were just able just to be. Do you know what I mean? and you know, and I mean, it's, you know, so I absolutely fell away from sport at that time. But, you know, this is bearing in mind, we were all really, you know, amongst my little troop of diverse people who weren't sporty. I mean, we were all really active. We all cycled everywhere. And, you know, we'd spend out, you know, weekends, we'd all cycle off into the countryside and sit in a field, you know, 10, 12 miles away and have a picnic and then all cycle home again and stuff. So, you know, so I was getting, you know, we also walked as well. So I spent a lot of time.
You were active, weren't you? But not in your traditional sports sense, which is actually, you know, brilliant stuff.
Yeah, totally.
You know, you're painting a brilliant picture about those sort of university years where, for me, it really sounded like a clear direction and purpose was unfolding, you know, and how did you then take that forward into the work that you're now doing around, you know, with Pride Sport? How did that gap sort of fill between there and now?
Well, there was a whole load of stuff in between doing this housing job and working at Pride Sports, but I basically fell into Pride Sports I was working for, I ended up taking some time out to have my second daughter.
Okay, lovely.
And when I went back to work, I needed to dip my toe in the water. I'd been out of work for 3 years, and you know, in the work that I was doing, you know, things changed really, really quickly. So in housing, things had really changed during that time, and I didn't feel very confident. So I ended up thinking, well, what can I do to kind of get me, you know, to get my mojo back, you know, in the workplace. And a job came up working for an LGBTIQ plus charity that was about holistic health and well-being. And they used to do things like run retreats and weekends away and a whole load of stuff. And one of the things that they did was they had recently started doing was they'd set up a badminton club in Manchester. Anyway, so I did that for a few years, for various reasons, the charity had moved, blah blah blah, funding issues, various things. The charity wasn't very sustainable. It had originally been out in Cheshire and it moved into Manchester, and that was slightly the death of it, to be honest. Okay. But anyway, by the time I left, we'd done some great stuff, but also we'd set up, you know, we'd really developed this badminton offer in Manchester. We'd also set up, helped set up an LGBTIQ plus dance group in Manchester, ballroom dance group. You know, we'd helped support the establishment of a volleyball club. So you know, I was getting drawn into sport, basically.
Okay, yeah.
And then what happened was that that in, I think, 2005, a bunch of volunteers from the local LGBTIQ plus swim group Northern Wave put on an international tournament. So there are, just so to give people some background, there are community events all over Europe in non-COVID times, literally every weekend of the year. So there'll be what are called city tournaments. So there's like a really famous one called the Christmas tournament in Frankfurt that happens at the beginning of December. And they may choose something like 8 sports and hold tournaments in those sports.
And how big is that? You know, in terms, you know, how well attended is it, would you say?
Yeah, like, I mean, well, on the city, I think like on the Frankfurt tournament, when I used to go, there'd be a couple of thousand people participating. Right. So, you know, you've got 8 sports. Like I went there to play basketball a few times. And, you know, in terms of basketball, there were always, you know, 10 or 12 teams competing in the women's tournament. You know, and then they would have like a football tournament. So, I mean, in Manchester, in its heyday, there were a couple of thousand people coming to Manchester to take part in the city tournament that was called Pride Games. Okay. So it was set up by these volunteers. I got involved in it in my role with this charity that I was working with at the time, doing some sort of add-on, some sort of fringe events, I suppose.
I can see where this is going a little bit. It's coming together again, isn't it? Like it does in your story.
Yeah, totally. And then basically the chair of the swimming club, a guy called Trevor, approached me and was just like, you know, we were kind of evaluating, you know, Pride Games, the first Pride Games, and how it had gone. And Trevor said to me, you know, Lou, we really need a bit more of a vehicle to this because it was so big this year and it was so stressful for all the volunteers. So we need to put a bit more energy into this. And so we set up Pride Sports really as a vehicle for that event. And then really, really quickly. So we kind of set that up in 2006 and kind of really quickly, I think, because we were the only organization that was like an LGBT sports organization, we really quickly saw a need to start, to start talking about, you know, the exclusion that people were facing.
So look, what is it that you bring to this? You know, why you know, I'm smiling in a sense of, you know, there seems to be like, oh, lots of fortuitous things happen, but I don't think that's the case. I think there's something that there's within you, or why does Trevor come to you? What is it about you that some of our listeners might go, wow, you know, I can see why they chose Lou, or what's the attributes or qualities that she brings to these development roles and making things happen? How would you describe that?
I think I'm enthusiastic.
Yeah.
I love a new idea. I'm very inspired by new things. So you know, so I remember a colleague, we had a celebration event for football versus homophobia. We had like 10 years of the campaign, a year and a half or so ago, and we got colleagues to say, you know, why they'd supported football versus homophobia, why they'd been involved. And I remember one colleague who I know really well said, oh, you know, we love, his quote was something like, we love football versus homophobia. There's always great ideas there. And I just thought, yeah, actually, we've always got really good ideas, you know. We could, you know, there's other things that, so for example, you know, when I worked in the housing job, developing the housing thing, the housing project, when that came to an end, everybody said to me, oh, you know, so are you going to go for the housing manager's job, Lou? And I was like, oh no, I can't think of anything worse than, you know, housing management. Oh no, you know, I know that I would be bored stiff. You know, it just didn't appeal to me at all. And so in the time after that, I became a freelancer and I just worked a whole load of different projects over the years. And, you know, and that's the kind of, I suppose that's the person that I am. I will run with an idea. If I believe in something, I will run with it and make it happen. So I think that that's possibly what Trevor saw in me.
You know what, the connection I also make, Lou, and I might be wrong here, but there's something about the variety of things that you've done and how you can call on all those different experiences to kind of help play out. And the other connection, and this is just a real long shot, but you know, you mentioned about your dad being kind of art and sport, and I wonder if there's something about creativity and sport and how bringing those kind of attributes together really fires together. You know?
Yeah, you know, I think that's really on the nail, actually, because I think that you know, I work, you know, at Pride Sports. You know, when I'm working at Pride Sports, one of the people who works most consistently on, you know, for the organisation as an associate is my colleague Jen, and she's a graphic designer. Right. So she does loads of graphic design, but she also does like loads of boring admin, bless her, as well. So I'm forever grateful to her. But you know, one of the things I think about you know, certainly about football versus homophobia is that it's a very visual campaign. And that we work, you know, we work in quite a visual way. So I do think there's something about creativity in the kind of visual sense. But I also think you're right about that. The creation of projects, the creation of solutions to problems that we've identified, I find really inspiring, I think, and exciting, and motivating.
And I think you also paint for me a lovely picture about, you know, a senior leader in an organisation, albeit, you know, very voluntary, but you've worked really hard to keep the various projects afloat, haven't you? Because it's challenging in the environment, but having that creative spirit as a leader, as a developer, as well as the kind of the nuts and bolts of running the system, you know, are absolutely crucial for any leaders listening out there, isn't they, in terms of thinking about what do they need and how can they gel bits together.
Yeah, right, definitely. And I mean, to say that, you know, it's not been, you know, I've been working in LGBTIQ plus inclusion and sport and physical activity for 15 years.
Right.
5 of those years, or 4 or 5 of those years, predated the Equality Act in the UK, and it has not been an easy gig.
Yeah.
You know, we held the first ever kind of conference that brought together community people who were delivering sport and physical activity in the LGBTIQ plus sector with people from national governing bodies for the first time in 2008. And, you know, that was the first time that NGBs had had anything to do with these people, you know, that were delivering sport in the community to one of the most marginalized groups of people in terms of sport and physical activity. And, you know, and it has been a slog, you're right. And I think that, yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe it is the variety of work, you know, that I have to do. So, you know, there are moments that are absolutely hilarious in my life where, you know, like I remember just before lockdown, I was speaking at the chairman's reception for LGBT History Month at Wembley one evening. And that morning, I'd just spent all morning stuffing envelopes with rainbow footballs because February's the Football versus Homophobia Month of Action, and we were like sending out rainbow footballs and campaign packs to grassroots clubs. And, you know, on the way to the station to go to Wembley to chair this reception on behalf of the chairman, I was like going to the post office and like having to stick all these rainbow footballs. So there is something there as well for me about the variety of stuff. Absolutely keeps me going as well. You know?
But I also want to kind of applaud for me the sort of the groundedness, isn't there, and the reality in the role that you're in, of having to really get your hands dirty, aren't you, and become very operational, and then sometimes you're very strategic, or you know, out there as a thought leader in the industry. Gosh, it must be such a variety on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, and well, it really is. It really is. And going back to your kind of insight about kind of creativity, I think the other thing as well for me is that, so on a level around sport, there's something for me, I think, as a person about not being too much in my head.
Okay. Yeah.
So, for example, you know, now to keep fit, you know, I jog, I suppose. Let's call it what it actually is. I'd like to call it running, but you know, I've been overtaken by, you know, older people going out for a stroll, I think. But you know, I know that, for example, if I'm running a certain distance, you know, you get that thing where all of a sudden you're not really aware that you're running.
Yeah.
You know, if you're not pushing yourself, you get into your rhythm, you're in your head, blah blah blah. And I think that I always get 2/3 of the way through any kind of like endurance thing, any kind of like long distance run, and 2/3 of the way through the run is always my worst moment. You know, right. It's always the point at which I think, oh my gosh, you know, I'm not going to make this. I can't do it. yeah, I'm going to die. All of those things, you know, and then I just kind of go through this big dip and then up again. And I think, you know, partly that is that I think that I need to be grounded in some getting my hands dirty as a person. I think I am that kind of person. And I think that I'm lucky to have a real diversity of roles. So there's something very, as you said, very grounding about packaging up a load of footballs, or, you know, or putting together, you know, conference packs for our next conference, which I will do as well as open the conference, which is really good for me as a person.
Again, you know, there's something really humbling, but also really important for me in terms of, you know, the principle about not losing sight of what it's all about. Actually, you know, and, you know, sending out the packs and really trying to make a difference to the client base, the colleagues, the stakeholders, the audience, you know, the communities out there. Sounds like, you know, that's your purpose there, isn't that's the organization's purpose. So I really love the idea of, you know, it's like, why do not more leaders get out of their kind of their ivory towers and actually get their hands dirty, to not lose sight of what it's like on the shop floor, or, you know, that's kind of the principle.
Yeah, I suppose, you know, I mean, I don't want to criticize anybody for not doing that. But for example, one of the events that we're involved in every year is something called Pride Youth Games. And we run that with our sister organisations in Scotland and in Wales. And it's such a brilliant event to go to, because it's the kind of queerest sport event that you can be part of, because, you know, half the young people turn up, they haven't got proper trainers, you know, they haven't got stuff, and they go and they take part in sport and physical activity, and all our coaches, whoever they are, and they may be people that, you know, don't have a history with our community, we brief them beforehand, but we always get amazing coaches to work with our young people. And these young people who are just like, oh no, don't do sport, you know, it's really homophobic, or it's really transphobic, you know, oh, stupid rules about trans people taking part in sport, or, oh, I'm non-binary, I hate sport, where do I fit into gendered sport? You know, they come along and they just take part in this fantastic mixed weekend of sport and physical activity. And you know, like I just remember, like the last version pre-COVID was in Manchester, and we had a fantastic golf coach from Manchester who came along, and he's just great. I've worked with him in loads of different situations, and when he finished his session with the young people, he came in and it'd been chucking it down with rain. It was like the worst day ever. And I was like, oh, you know, how did it go? How did the session go? And he was like, oh, you know, Lou, it was quite good. He said, because when all the young people turned up for their sessions throughout the day, they turn up and they'd be like, oh, this is really easy. All you've got to do is hit a ball. And he said, you know, and then he started working with them and teaching them actually how to hold the club, I guess, and hit the ball properly. And you know, there was that beautiful thing where they were like, oh no, actually, this isn't really easy. It's actually quite difficult. And then they got better at it.
Well, making a difference again, isn't it? You can make a difference.
Totally. So by the end of the session, they'd gone through that thing, you know, they'd gone through the, oh, anyone could do this, it's just whacking a ball, to, oh no, this is really difficult, I can't do it. And then they were coached, and then they were kind of like, oh, brilliant. Wow, I can, you know, did you see how I did that? Oh, that's, you know, oh, it's really great. And just young people being so delighted with the experience of taking part in that. And so, you know, we didn't have that this year, obviously, because of COVID. And we all really missed it. And what's really brilliant is, like, some of the youth leaders in the summer who bring the young people and work with us over the weekend were on social media, were tweeting, oh, we're really missing Pride Youth Games this year. It's so sad, you know, it's such a brilliant event. And it is, because it's literally the most empowering thing. Well, so being able to go to something like that really grounds you.
Well, and I'm coming back to a point that struck me earlier on around sort of avenues and opportunities, and you know, the population you're working with there often have had those avenues and opportunities cut off or not positioned. And I just sound like, you know, by creating an environment where people can go into and have a go and feel unthreatened, albeit it is quite a challenging environment, it just sounds fantastic. You know, and clearly, again, playing to your mantra of making a difference, it just sounds like it ticks all those kind of boxes, which is great.
Yeah, it does.
Lou, I can't not ask you this question, but, you know, in these last 15 years, where you mentioned a bit earlier on about the struggle, you know, and how you've put so much energy, what would you say has been one of your proudest moments? You know, one of the biggest things that you've managed to kind of nail for you?
I think, I suppose what is, I don't know whether there's a proudest, whether I've got a proudest moment particularly, but I think I can now, I've been doing it for so long, I can see the change.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
It's incremental
So now,
kind of stuff, the changes.
yeah. So now, now, for example, you've got active partnerships in the UK doing their own work around LGBTIQ plus inclusion. It's nothing to do with us.
Right.
They've done it on their own because they wanted to do it, but they wouldn't have been doing that, in my opinion, if we hadn't been working for the last 15 years to get this on, to get LGBTIQ plus inclusion on the agenda. That's what I think. And I'm not just singling out those active partnerships who are doing brilliant work. And as I say, it's nothing to do with us, directly, but it's about, we have created an environment in which those things are possible.
Yeah.
And I see that in lots of areas of our work, that these things, sometimes it's frustrating. I had a conversation with somebody a couple of days ago, and I was a bit like, oh dear, you're teaching your grandmother how to suck eggs. But on some levels, you've got to take that as a huge compliment, haven't you? Because, if that person, much younger person, feels really empowered and feels that they've got that knowledge and that they should be telling me that they've got that knowledge, I know that some of that knowledge has come from the work that we've done.
And you give me a real sense there of having to have that real intrinsic ratification, in terms of, you've done a great job, and how it spills out. You might never quite know, because people are not going to come and say you've done a great job, but you've rippled out, and you have had an impact, and you've got to be quite solid, haven't you, in what you're doing and your belief, knowing that actually you are making a difference.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's really nice to be thanked. Don't get me wrong.
No, absolutely.
It's really nice when we evaluate our conference, for example, or we evaluate a series of webinars we've just run, and everyone's scoring it really highly. That's lovely. Of course, that's really good. But yeah, I think, being in a position now where, there are other stakeholders in the space. There was maybe 2 tiny, weeny little voluntary organizations when we set up, or no, maybe there was nothing when we set up, but now, I think one of the challenges is that, when I first started working in this field, and then other people came along and said, oh, we're going to do this work, I remember feeling really defensive and really threatened, because there's also something about when there was very little acknowledgement in the space and very little funding, we were all scrabbling around fighting
for the same pot kind of stuff.
Totally. So it was really easy to feel really threatened by those things. And I think the joy now is that after the amount of time that we've been working in the space, new people, new organizations pop up along the way, and some of them disappear again, and we're just a bit more used to it now, so it just, and I also think, I also now know that sport and physical activity is enormous. There are not enough places that are fully inclusive of my community, and there can't be too many people doing the work.
So the more the merrier nearly now, isn't it? Come on board and help us.
Exactly.
And it's not competition, it's collaboration nearly now, isn't it?
100%. And I mean, we've always worked in a really collaborative way. So I've never said to anyone who's come along and started working in the sector, oh no, we're not going to work with you, but I felt a bit like, go away. This is our tiny little area. And now I'm just a bit more relaxed about that, and and just think that if there were 100 organizations doing this work, it would only be a good thing.
Look, during the hard times, how do you pull yourself through?
By talking to people, really, by talking and getting perspective, I think, absolutely. So that, I am a people person, and sometimes it's not easy to talk about things, and and I do carry some things that I should let go of more, but I think I think talking to people, I think you know, doing things. It sounds so corny, but just doing things like physical exercise, really.
Yeah.
So, you know, going out and pounding it down some lanes in mid Wales, you know, or going out for, you know, I live in the foothills of the Brecon Beacons, so going out and walking up some hills, getting out of breath.
Yeah.
There is nothing as
better.
brilliant as getting out of breath, is
Yeah.
there, fundamentally?
It's a proper reset button, that, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is.
Do you know what? And as you're talking here, I would like to give you my thoughts. And, you know, you're talking there about the developing the organization from an early start and the, you know, trying to hold on to the space. But there's something really positive for me in some ways of being a groundbreaker. And, you know, I know it's a grand word, but somebody has to hold the space and push it forward. And it feels like the ground's been broken, you know, and now we're on our way. But, you know, I don't know if anybody's ever attributed that to you and the work that you do as being groundbreaking and you know, positive in that sense.
You know, the thing is, I don't think anyone said, "Oh, you're such a groundbreaker," but we have broken ground. Yeah. I mean, we absolutely have. You know, so it doesn't feel to me to be a grandiose thing or arrogant to say that in any way, because nobody was doing this work. You know, and now, you know, as I say, we've got sister organisations in Scotland. Leap Sports Scotland do amazing work. You know, it's some better work than us in some areas. You know, definitely. You know, there's also, you know, a much smaller organisation that's just volunteer run in Wales called LGBT Sport Cymru. But there are, you know, you know, those organisations, I know those organisations wouldn't have existed really if we hadn't broken the ground.
So what do you see for you and for maybe for Pride Sport and the kind of the community for the next 4 or 5 years? What do you see as both opportunities or threats going forward?
I think the threat always tends to be that we are quite an invisible minority.
Okay.
So we can be overlooked. I think we're in a terrible time in the UK at the moment with a lot of anti-trans activity. Right. And a lot of that is being targeted at women's sport. And that's really, really tragic. You know, I just think sort of 4 or 5 years ago in women's sport, we were talking about, in sport rather, we were talking about, you know, the really small margins of difference between men's and women's sport. And actually in some sports, there was no margin of, you know, performance margin at all. And now, you know, the whole narrative is, oh, we've got to protect women's sport because women are so weak and women are so slow and women are so small. And it's such a retrograde step. As far as I'm concerned, you know, in relation to a tiny little marginalized community that are actually no threat to anybody whatsoever. So I think we've got so much work to do in that space. I think we are seeing a growth in we're seeing a growth in kind of hate speech, homophobia, biphobia, transphobia on social media. I think we are living in quite strange times. And the other thing I need to say at this point is, because I've worked internationally for a number of years, mainly voluntarily, although Pride Sports does get us to speak at a lot of events internationally as well. But because I've worked internationally, you know, really since about 2008, I suppose. You know, I'm aware that there are societies in which LGBTIQ plus human rights have gone backwards. You know, we only need to look at places like Russia, Turkey, Hungary, some of those societies, you know, where in the 1990s, you know, it was Poland, for example. I mean, I went to play basketball with a queer basketball team. I went to play basketball in Poland maybe, you know, about 8 years ago or something, and it was all a bit groundbreaking and exciting because we weren't in Warsaw, we were in Wrocław.
Right.
And so it was a bit out there, you know, being a queer basketball team, turning up. We played this exhibition match against the local team, and there was, you know, anyway. So we did that. And now you look at, you know, there's LGBT free zones in Poland. So, so I am constantly aware, I suppose, of reversibility, the reversibility of human rights, the reversibility of inclusion.
Yeah. And actually, we've got to keep moving forward, otherwise we very easily will start moving bawards as a community.
Yeah, totally. And people say, oh, what's your hope? Is your hope that one day pride sports will never be needed? And I just think, oh, that's pie in the sky. You know, because the way the world exists, you know, we will always be a minority, and we will always have to fight for our voices to be heard. Because worst case scenario will be ignored and overlooked, or best case scenario will be ignored and overlooked, and worst case scenario, somebody will come and try and deny us our rights.
Wow. Well, I'm conscious of one of the great projects which we're coming to now, and I didn't want us to finish off without just touching on the football versus homophobia project, which is coming to the fore in February. So can you just tell us a little bit more about that, just before we get to a few quick fire questions I'd like to pose to you, because I just think that's such a huge project for you, and I know you've put so much energy into it. So
February is the Football versus Homophobia Month of Action. It started off as a day of action, became a week of action, then 2 weeks, now it's a month. So
be a year soon.
So, well, we work all year round through that brand anyway, but in February we have our month of action. It's a little bit odd this year, because ordinarily what we do is we invite the whole of football to get involved, to take a specific action to make football more inclusive. So unlike other campaigns, which are all about, you know, visible demonstrations of support, there's a bit of that in our campaign, a bit of visible demonstrations of support. But for example, our grassroots campaign asks people to designate a game as a visible show of support, but it also asks them to take a pledge to do one thing to make their club more LGBTIQ plus inclusive. And then we send all the clubs out a campaign pack. There's only about 8 things in there. We're kind of like, here are some ideas of things that you can do to make your club more inclusive and welcoming, and you know, just to help people on the way, and just a great focal point really for people to think, to become more conscious about what they can do. But we also insist that people do one thing. We don't want, you know, oh, we'll give you a tweet, or we'll change our icon to rainbow colours. You know, it's kind of like, we ask you to do things. So this month, because because there's no grassroots football taking place, we're doing some work with some professional clubs behind the scenes, some kind of educational work.
Great.
And then we've also got a load of kind of online webinars taking place over the next 4 weeks. We've got a launch on this Saturday. Charlton Athletic Football Club are launching the month of action, and they're live streaming that through their Twitter account for us. Brilliant. Which is great. On the 5th last year we launched some awards, because we feel like we've been around so long now, you know, that it's time that somebody started to acknowledge the good work that's taking place in the sector. So we've got some awards coming up on the 5th. We've shortlisted those and publicised those, and we'll be announcing the winners on the evening of the 5th. And then right towards the end of the month of action, 24th, 25th of February, we've got an international conference, What's Next for LGBTIQ Inclusion in Football. And that's an international conference with the Fair Network. So yeah, loads happening. hopefully everyone hasn't got Zoom fatigue and doesn't want to get involved, because we'd love to see as many people as possible involved.
Well, what really strikes me, Lou, again, is coming back to that, you know, times are a bit of a challenge at the moment with, as you say, less grassroots stuff going on. So you've pulled on the creativity card, you know, and you might take a slightly different approach this year, you know, but I guess next year we'll look out for hopefully let's be back on the fields and doing something different yet again. But, you know, you're clearly making a really good go of engaging and keeping the noise and the messages out there and supporting the community. So great stuff. And, you know, what I'd like to do is just wish you good luck with that, and also to offer our support where we can. Lou, I want to just close us down now a little, and I want to play on the idea again. You know, you're really good, and one of your key beliefs is making a difference. So I'm just going to ask you one or two questions, if I could, in terms of any tips or advice that you might give to our listeners around helping them. And what I mean by that is, you know, my first question would be, you know, has there been any kind of resources or books or places of reference which have really influenced you, either recently or over the past, which you might steer somebody who's been really taken by your story and would like to go and find out a bit more? Or
blank.
Blank, okay.
I think in terms of resources, that resources that have helped me, yeah. I would say the best resources that we have are the people around us. Okay. So you know, I will, if I find, you know, I'm somebody who always likes to talk things through with people. Okay. And not everybody is that person, but talking things through with people just always gives you the most amazing perspective. So, yeah, and what I mean by that is not only people involved in your organisation. You know, I'm also not frightened to reach out to people in partner organisations as well. So, you know, my colleague Hugh at Leap Sports Scotland, bless him, probably has me muted on WhatsApp.
And you've got a hotline into him, have you?
Yeah, yeah, totally. But you know, because if I'm unsure of things, then, you know, I think don't be afraid to ask advice from people or to consult with people. Because we can get really caught up about, you know, being leaders and not asking for help or not asking for support. And I think that the capacity to do that is really, really, really important. Yeah. And, you know, for some people, it will be reading. You know, some people will need to go away and read something, and that will, you know, make a real difference to them. I know a chief exec who really likes to kind of read through, you know, read through books that for senior leaders that are kind of advice guides, and I am not that person. Yeah, you know, I like her to read the book, and then I like to ask her for advice.
So somebody to do the hard work for you and interpret it and summarize it. Hey?
Yeah, totally. How does it work for you again? Yeah,
I'll do that.
Yeah, totally.
Oh, well, I think that really plays, though, to actually a lot of my philosophy in terms of what we're doing with sports stories and really promoting the idea of coaching and mentoring, or, you know, that idea of actually having a sounding board, whether it's a formal relationship or informal, or a colleague even, you know, but that coaching and mentoring doesn't need to always be formal. But, you know, that's something that I'm really keen to promote and offer as well, because I just see there's so much value in it. And it's lovely to hear you sort of advocate and support that approach.
Yeah, definitely. And you know, the other thing to say is as well, I know that I will look back on this conversation and I will have definitely got something from it. You know, you will have made me think about something in a new way. You will have made me discover something about myself that I haven't really reflected on properly before. So, you know, yeah, definitely talking to people, having conversations like these with people like you make a massive difference.
Oh, Lou, I've been blown away by your humour, your honesty, actually, and also your journey and the meandering of it, actually. And I really like that, because I think you've painted a lovely picture in terms of actually people's careers and lives are not always very linear. They go all over the place, but you know, they do sometimes start to make sense, or we can start driving them. What advice would you now give if you were to look back to a teenage version of yourself? So, you know, somebody who's looking back going, gosh, I just need a few tips or a bit of advice. Is there any advice that you would give to yourself that others might sort of hook onto?
Slightly take a big deep breath, I think, would be the first thing. And I think, you know, I think I was quite a nervous young person, and I think it's taken me, you know, my advice to myself would be, you will grow into yourself. Don't panic. You will absolutely grow into yourself. Right. And also, you know, what I've come to learn, I suppose, is that that the things that when I was a teenager, you know, I've always been, you know, I'm shrinking now, but I used to be about 5'11". You know, I'm a big woman. I look different to a lot of women. You know, when I was a teenager, that was mortifying because, you know, I always felt like Hagrid, you know, or something. Well, Hagrid didn't exist then, but, you know, I always felt like a big giant, you know, and out of place, and I was quite loud, and I felt like I was too much. Right. And I think, you know, that was a really disconcerting time for me, and struggling with my sexuality. So all I want to say to my teenage self is, it will all be all right.
Trust the process, nearly.
Yes.
You know, I know it's a throwaway comment, but nearly, and enjoy. I know those aren't your words, but my words, kind of nearly try and enjoy the process as best you can. I know it's hard, but it's.
Yeah, I know. Yes, and I really agree with you. And I think I would say to myself as well, you're actually more resilient than you know.
Okay, lovely.
You know, so I think that's a thing, a lesson in life, isn't it? As we get older, it's actually, as things come to challenge you, you know, you don't fall into small, tiny pieces in the way that you think you're going to necessarily.
Lou, you've shared your sports story, or your story, and as we've meandered in and out of the world of sport, but that, you know, it's more about you as an individual, or the journey you've been on. Is there anybody in your world who you'd think you'd love to know more about their story, or you think the listeners might like to know? So whose sports story might we bounce onto?
Wow. I think there are just so many. There are so many great people out there. You know, there's so many. There's so many good people that I would talk to. I think from my perspective, I think Veronica Ivy, who is a trans track cyclist based in the US, she is amazing. She spoke at our conference a couple of years ago, and her story's fascinating because she's like a world record holder in her category, in her masters category now. But she didn't have a direct route either, so she came through badminton initially.
I love it.
So she
don't tell anymore. Don't tell anymore. We'll try and find out.
Yeah. So she's an amazing person to listen to, I think. So there you are. I will put all my money on speaking to Veronica Ivy.
Oh well, no, thank you for that. And I guess my very last sort of offer to you would be, you know, look, as I've already said, I've been blown away by your story and the great work you're doing and the energy that you've put into it. You know, should any of our listeners be interested to find out a little bit more about what you're doing, but also what Pride Sports doing and is all about, how might they be able to either find out about you or contact you?
Okay, so the best way to get in touch with us is via email, and it's info@pridesports.org.uk. Our website is obviously www.pridesports.org.uk. We're on Twitter at Pride Sports UK, and then if you're particularly interested in our work in football, we're football v homophobia.com, and on Twitter as @FVH tweet.
So lots of different avenues there. Well, Luke, good luck over the next month and again over the next year during the challenging times. But you've lived through many challenging times, so I'm sure this one's not going to be any different, and you'll just keep on plugging away and doing the great work that you are doing. And it just leaves me to say a really massive thanks for sharing your journey and your story. And I'd love to have you back on again at some stage in, who knows, in 18 months, a year or two's time, where we can sort of catch up and see where the journeys continue to, not just for you, but also for the organisation. But, thanks ever so much.
Brilliant. No, thanks so much for having me on.
Great stuff. Take care and look after yourself.
Thank you, will do.
Wow, well, I wasn't disappointed there. Bringing human rights and sport together through Lou's story was just amazing and fantastic and truly engaging. I don't know about you, but for me, it wasn't disappointing. She was really engaging, really passionate, inspirational, infectious, really wants to make a difference. And in summary, I really believe that she was quite groundbreaking in the work that she is doing and has done over the past 15 years and even longer. The work around the LGBTIQ plus community and the difference that she's making and has continued to make is just incredible. It's really made me consider a number of things around how I feel within sort of marginalized or minority groups and what it might be like to be part of that, or also to work and support another of those types of groups. The other thing that really struck me today was about how she grew up and the impact her father and her family had on her, and what it was like for her before she came out, but also after having come out into her 20s when she was at university, and the environments and the journey that she went on. Lou really epitomised for me the idea of self-awareness and how she had personally grown, and her curiosity to learn and develop and continue to find out more about who she is and what she's all about. I think that's a journey that we're all on in so many ways, in terms of actually, who am I and how do I turn up in the world? And Lou, for me today, really epitomised again how she talked about her journey, her openness, her frankness about her sexuality, about some of the challenges she's had in the roles that she's played, but also her true resilience and her determination and power to move things forward and make a difference in the world. It was just a completely engaging, fascinating story for me. And what was really key as well is that it wasn't just in sport, it was also about how she turns up in the world as a leader, as a woman, as a person actually, and how she can actually drive things forward. So there's many principles and takeaways for all of us, whether we're a parent, a teacher, a coach, a leader, or an athlete. Okay, so for me, what a great story to take. I really hope you got something out of it. What I would ask you to do now is just to take a few minutes to reflect on the questions I'd like to pose. And today's questions I'd like to pose are, firstly, how do you join the dots up or join the dots back in order to make sense of your life so far to inform your future? And secondly, when have you been in a minority group or a community? How did it feel? I wonder what it would be like to consider a perspective from both the majority and or the minority perspective. What may you do differently as a result of that? I really think it's important when they talk about the idea of stepping into somebody else's shoes is to not lose sight of your shoes. So look through their shoes and yours, or look from their shoes and look from yours. I think it's really important to consider both perspectives. So there we have it, a couple of big questions. And as always, I pose the questions with the intent of really helping you move things forward for you. Without just taking the information and not taking any action, then we won't really reap the rewards and the benefits. So please consider the questions and take some action. In order to really help you do that, we offer a coaching and mentoring services. So please consider that. And to find out more details, why not have a look on our website, which is www.sportstories247.com. And more broadly, if you're interested in the work that I'm doing and also what Sports Stories is doing, please have a look at all the usual social media channels. We're on Twitter, LinkedIn and Facebook, and it'd be great to have you engage with us a little bit more. Now, it would be rude of me not to finish off by saying a massive thanks to today's guest, Lou Englefield, and obviously with all our other guests and Lou, we wouldn't have a really great backlog of stories and inspiration, education, with the help to really help you move things forward. So thanks again to everybody that's been involved, but more importantly also to thank you, the listeners. So without you engaging, listening, offering feedback and asking and requesting how we can move things forward, then the whole Sports Stories movement would not have the value it has today. So thank you very much. Lastly now, we're coming towards the end of Series 4. We have a great guest lined up for our last one next week, which is an individual who's been involved with, can you believe it, 6 Olympic Games. So what a great story that will be. Please engage, bring the best version of yourself along, your curiosity and your willingness to learn, and I'm sure you'll get loads of value out of that. So it ends up with me saying, have a great week, look after yourself, keep curious, keep learning, consider those questions that I've posed, and please keep in touch. And I look forward to having you with me, Dave Levine, again next week for the last episode in Series 4. Take care and look after yourself. Bye for now.